In this video, we're going to be doing rear brakes on this 2005 Honda Element. We're going to remove the rear wheel. It's going to be a 19mm socket. I'll go ahead and take these lug nuts off. So our caliper is going to be held in by 2 bolts. They're going to be 14mm. Go ahead and loosen those up. There will be times where the inner nut here will spin. You may have to lock that down with a wrench. A lot of times that's on the reinstallation, but sometimes it'll happen on the removal. And because we're working on the rear, once we get our caliper free, we're going to spin it up and over and rest it on top here. So our caliper sometimes will pull right off, and then sometimes we'll have to get in here with a pry bar. This one's working its way right off, and it's actually taking the pads with it. So we have our pads that came off with it. Now we can take our caliper. We're just going to rest it right up on top here, or if you decide to, rest it right down here. The goal is to not let it drop and not put any undue stress on your brake hose. Now that that's out of the way, we can come back here and remove our caliper bracket. Caliper bracket's also going to be 14mm. You may want a breaker bar here. These are torqued in pretty good. So what I like to do is loosen one most of the way, but leave it in, and then come down the bottom, or the opposite, and take one all the way out. It'll hold your caliper bracket from running around too much on you. One hand on the bracket and can take it right out. So now that we have our caliper bracket out, typically what you would have here are 2 Phillips screws in here. Our vehicle doesn't have them, but you would need to take these out. Once you get these out, you should be able to bang on your rotor a little bit, loosen it up, and pull it straight off. You may have a little resistance. You have parking brakes inside here. So just try and work it off as even as you can. Sometimes what you'll need to do is a little rubber mallet, give it a couple of taps, spin it, a couple more taps to work it off. So we're going to clean this surface up the best we can. We're going to get rid of any loose corrosion or rust, and we're going to make it as flat as we can. So when we put our rotor on there, it meets up nice and flush and sits nice and even. We're going to start that with a little abrasive wheel. This isn't a sanding disc. We're not trying to take off material. We're trying to take off rust and corrosion. Once we're done with that, we'll switch over to our wire brush. That'll allow us to get in these areas that we can't with the air tool. And sometimes what I'll do here, just to make it a little bit easier, is I will spin the hub. At this point, you're going to want to put down some kind of drip pan, cloth, or absorbent pad. We're just going to clean this up with some brake clean. and a little bit on our brake hardware just to keep that clean. We'll let that dry, and we'll come back with some anti-seize on this surface. So now we have our hub surface cleaned, and we sprayed it down with some brake cleaner. We're going to hit it with some anti-seize, but before we do that, our anti-seize is in a spray can. We do not need to spray our parking brakes. So we're just going to cover those up with a paper towel. All right, we'll let that dry, and we're going to clean up our caliper bracket. All right, so what we're going to do is clean up our caliper bracket, and we're going to clean up where our brake hardware goes. Also, what you want to do while you're here is get rid of any loose rust or corrosion that's flaking. Just give it a good once over with the brush. You want to try and keep that stuff out of your brake system the best you can. With doing it like this, there's no way you're going to get all of it, but any little bit helps. And we'll give it a good pass where the hardware is going to go. Now, what you can also do here, what I probably recommend, is to take your pins out. See, this one's actually ripped. We don't want to make it any worse. So what we're going to do is take our caliper pins out before we wire brush it. Start with your pin. To try and keep things somewhat clean, we're going to lay them on a rag. And this one's also pretty ripped up. Now you notice there's no difference in the pins. So top is bottom, bottom is top. Some of them have a little rubber on the pin. You want to keep them separate, not these. So now what we can do is clean these up. Now, because this bracket itself, where the hardware goes here, is pretty flat and easy to access, we're going to use an air tool and just clean up these chunks of rust. All right, while we're here, this isn't a sanding disc. I want to make that clear. This isn't a sanding disc. This is just an abrasive disc. It's not going to take off metal. The reason I wanted to say that is we're going to go right here. Right where the bolts go. Just give it a quick pass. And on this side where the bolts go as well. Now from here, what we're going to do is use some brake clean in where the caliper pins go. Just going to try and flush those out, wash them out. All right, we'll flip this up and let it drip dry. Now we can concentrate on our caliper pins. What we're going to do is take our two pins, because they are identical, put them in a clean rag, and spray them with brake clean. We're going to use the rag to wipe them down, so don't be afraid to saturate here. We're going to take these to the wire wheel, clean up basically from here back and all in here. We're going to take our cleaned up caliper pin and all the way up to that rib, put a light coat of grease all the way down. A little dab on the bottom. We're going to take our boot. We're going to put it in first. We're going to take our caliper pin, greased up, put it into position. Press it all the way in till that boot pops up over the ridge. Clean up any residual grease. Cycle it a couple of times. Do the same thing on the other side. Take your boot, a little dab on the end, into the caliper, push, and cycle. Now these will act slightly different than yours at home because we have rips in our boots, but we're just going through the process with you. Take the rag, wipe off the excess. A little more grease where our hardware is going to go. And if you have any bare metal on that hardware area, try and cover it with the grease. It'll help with moisture and corrosion. Put our hardware into place, just press into place. Now we're ready to take this to the vehicle. So now that our anti-seize has dried up on our hub surface, we're going to take our rotor, I'm going to put it on backwards. Give that a quick wipe. Once that's dry, we're going to take it out, flip it around. We're going to line up our rotor to where our Phillips screws would go. So if we try and put our rotor on and it's not fitting over our pads are too far out, pushing against the inside of our rotor, which is how your emergency brake works. If you need to adjust these in tighter, you're going to come down here to this adjustment wheel. It's going to be little notches and a spring above it. What you're going to do to tighten up your parking brake here is take a flathead screwdriver and push that wheel downwards. There we go. Where we can now take our rotor and slide it on. So now if you have your Phillips screws, go ahead and put them in. We're going to listen for any grinding, or we're going to make sure it rotates so that our parking brake is free enough. Seems pretty good. If you need to do any more adjustment, what you're going to do is find this hole here. You're going to rotate until that hole, and you look through it, lines up with that adjustment wheel. And if you need to adjust any more, you come through here with a flathead screwdriver and you adjust that wheel either downwards or upwards. Upwards will open it up and make more contact with the inside. You'll know you have the right adjustment when you put a wheel on this and you free spin it, and it goes about 1.5 rotations. You want to do that to that adjustment on both sides. So now we're going to take our caliper bracket, put it into position, and start our 2 bolts by hand. All right, they're going to be 14 millimeters. We're going to snug these up, and then we'll come back and torque them down. You can come back here if you want. Just give it a quick wipe. So our 2 14 millimeter caliper bolts are going to be torqued down to 79 foot-pounds. Inside our caliper, we have a bracket that looks like this that we're going to have to remove now. The bracket that's in there is broken, so only a portion of it's going to come out, or is left. We're going to get in there with a flathead screwdriver, see if we can remove this bracket. There we go. Just press into place from the front. If you need to, move it over, flathead screwdriver, and push outward will allow you to center it a little bit better. Now before we put our new pads on and put our piston into place, we're going to need to compress this piston. So our new pads will be thicker than our old pads, our old worn pads, so the piston's out further than it can be to slide over our new pads. So we're going to use a tool here and compress the piston. You can use a C-clamp. So we have our caliper here set up with our piston compression tool, and it's just in there tight enough not to move around. Before we start compressing our piston, we are going to flip this over and crack open our bleeder screw. What that's going to allow is any pressure from pushing our brake fluid backward through the line won't disrupt our ABS module or sensors in any way. So this is going to be a 10mm and probably brake. Yep, so we're not popping the brake bleeder at all. So our bleeder screw is stuck. So we're going to slowly compress the piston without relieving the pressure through the bleeder screw. And ideally you want to compress the piston all the way, but if you don't need to compress all the way to get over the new pads, then only go as far as you need to. Now that you've compressed your piston, go ahead and release your tool. Now that you've compressed your piston, you can go ahead and put it on our pads, but first we need our pads. Rear pad's going to go in with the wear indicator downwards. Slide it into position. Front pad's going to go on the front. And we can close up our piston. And thread those in by hand to start. Because of our new spring hardware here, I'm going to have to push to align the caliper bolts. All right, now these are 14mm, so we're going to snug these up. And again, on this side here, you can see that the inner nut is spinning. All right, so we're going to have to grab a wrench, hold that. All right, so we're going to back that up with a 17mm. We're going to snug these up, torque these bolts down to 25 foot-pounds. Same thing on the bottom. Our brake bleeder screw is rotted and pretty well stuck in there and rusted in there. So we're going to use a tool, which is an induction heater. We're going to put the induction heater on the bleeder, press the button, and see what happens. So you don't want to get it too hot. What do you say? All right, we're going to open it up enough to let fluid come out. Once we start seeing fluid out, we're going to wait for no hesitation, no air bubbles or breaks in the fluid line. Once we get that, we're going to close the bleeder back up. Now that we have a clean drip of fluid, we're going to tighten this back up. And it's going to be about 6 pounds of pressure to tighten up that bleeder screw, so you don't need much. What we are going to do is come back with some brake clean, clean up that area of any residual brake fluid. We'll dry this up and we'll keep an eye on this. If we see any wet areas, we know we have a leak. We're going to put our tire on. So sometimes pay attention back here and notice that the wheel isn't sitting all the way flush against the rotor. Sometimes I'll put one all the way on as tight as I can, rock it, do the bottom, and go back and forth. It should usually get it pretty flush. I'm just going to snug these up. We'll lower the vehicle, we'll torque these down. Now that we have the vehicle on the ground and the tires stopped from rotating, we're going to tighten down our lug nuts to 79 foot-pounds. We're going to do it in a star pattern. Go ahead now.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.